Thank you so much. It's a blessing to be here today with all of you. Thank you, Zachary, for inviting me to come. Um, so, he asked me to talk about the opportunities and challenges that the United States and Africa have. And I think this room probably knows them better than a lot of people around. But let me start, and these are the challenge. I want to start with challenges first because I think we need to address the challenges with opportunities. So let me start with challenges that I hear. So this isn't all what I think, but this is the perception that's out there sometimes. I hear things about access to capital. Probably none of you guys have thought about that in this room. We've talked about how do we starve corruption through prosperity? I say it that way because one of the reasons Liberty University was brought up earlier, and I help with the African Summit at Liberty University each year. And one of the things that I do is try to help Fortune 500 CEOs go to Africa or the Middle East. Many times, all of you guys from your respective countries have traditions that America's CEOs do not understand. And so as you host an American CEO, they will do, let's call it, dumb things. They don't mean to be disrespectful to you, but they don't know culture. And this is something that I try to teach them, but it comes up a lot on this. So that's why I talk about that. I think finding the right partners. When I talk to people from Africa and from the United States, there sometimes is the lack of finding that right partnership between the two of you. Sometimes those are very hard things to do, and a lot of times the only way to do that is find that in prayer. The population growth, we're going to talk about that as a challenge. How about how different countries think? In the United States, it used to be we thought in decades. Today, I would say we think on election cycles, as the congressman was talking about and we were talking about before the meeting started. I used to think that, the United States used to think every 10 years or every 8 years at least. Then it went to 4 years, and now I think we're down to 2 years. So sometimes if your country has a relationship that might be strained with the United States, wait 2 years, things might change. And we can talk about that a little bit. Training is something. I think that's something that in developed countries, we talk about that we want to train everyone. As in most of Africa's 54 countries are agrarian countries, and so most of the training goes to agricultural workers. And even there, as we're going to get into later, that I work in a lot of agricultural settings, even they're not trained to the proper level. One of the comments I hear a lot about is, from the African side, is we've been taken advantage of, so we don't want to trust. So it comes down to trust. I think that's a big issue that we need to talk about. One of the things we don't talk about enough is the relationship across Africa's 54 countries. Benin, Ghana, Cameroon, Nigeria, any of those ones that are on the West Coast really need to have a relationship with their partner countries on the East, like Kenya, Tanzania, others, because to ship something from Tanzania to the East Coast of the United States is 65 to 67 days by ship. If we ship it from Ghana or Senegal or one of those, it becomes 30 to 34 days. When you're talking perishable goods, that's a huge difference. So there also needs to be a way to look within Africa to partnership on some of those. So those are just part of the challenges that I think we need to talk about. But how are we going to fix those? What are the opportunities, which I want to end on? And that is, with increased trade, Trump, the last 2 days, you've talked about The time for, you'll hear rhetoric in the next few days in the news about the time for aid is done and the time for trade is now. Those can be frightening words, but those can also be very empowering words. So, how can we lift ourselves up? And this is a two-way street. How can we lift ourselves up from, I'm going to give you a hand out, to a hand up? And I think as Christians, that is a key statement that we should all empower. And how do we do? How can we grow our economies together? We've talked a little bit about the deficit and the trade dollars the United States has spent. We've talked about how far in debt the United States is and how sometimes that hampers trade and our GDP could be stronger. A lot of people, when I'm talking to them about trade around the world, they're like, we want United States to be prosperous. We want their GDP to be good because the way United States' GDP goes, the world GDP goes. So if you look at it from that way, we should partner together in more of those instances. Several of you around the room are going to be talking about minerals today. I'm not a miner, I'm a farmer. I kind of skipped over my intro. I'll go back to that at the end so you'll know. But I go in and sometimes see the worst of the minerals. And I'm sorry for that, but it's because I work in agriculture. A lot of times I'm brought in when mining's change, I end up fixing a pollution problem or trying to fix the soil that someone didn't think ahead. It goes back to the timeline that we think about in business. And return the soil to where that country can have good agricultural production. And that's planning for the future. When we think about this planning for the future is probably the most important thing, because I said one of the challenges was population growth, but one of the best things about population growth is planning for the future, that you have 60 to 65% of the arable land that can be used for growing food in the future. You have the majority, or will have the majority of the population. We talk about other countries, China and India, being some of the larger countries with population, but what are those populations doing currently? They're actually declining. So if the current projections keep going, Africa as a continent will have the largest population very soon. So how can that be a benefit rather than a challenge? I skipped over my intro kind of on purpose because I wanted to talk about those things first. In all honesty, I'm blessed to be here and thank you for inviting me, but I'm just a farmer from Kansas. I really am, and that's where my heart is. And so as I travel, and I have been to all 54 countries in Africa, and all 16 countries in the Middle East when you look at it as a whole. I'm lacking 12 countries in the whole world. I travel to about 25 countries a year and have for 30 years. So, yeah, I really don't look that old, but I am. I'm just kidding. My kids reminded me of this regularly because I tell them that because I have 4 kids at home, that's why I have gray hair. But, as we all need glasses and everything else, it just comes with the territory. I started out, my life story is I was a farmer. I'm a 5th generation farmer that our farm started in 1876. But because of the hard work that it takes to be a farmer, and that's been brought up, I wanted to do anything I could other than stay home and be a farmer. So I found ways to argue with my father and find ways to find away from the farm. And so I went into journalism, then went into cinematology. And so that's my degree background. It's not agriculture, it's journalism. And I was very fortunate to be hired on by George Lucas and then National Geographic. And my first assignment as hired on was hire 6 more people, go to the mouth of the Congo, and see how long you can go up the Congo River. So I was 21 years old when I went to Africa my first time. I bought 2 boats on someone else's credit card, which was great as a 21-year-old, and spent the next 4 months going up the Congo River and I got indoctrinated into what Africa really is. Um, I've gotten to see all of the wonders of the world. The Victoria Falls was mentioned in Zambia and Zimbabwe. And I also got to see all the bad of the world, which, as someone who grew up in rural America, I was sheltered. Um, I grew up in a town of 300, and my class had I graduated with 9 other individuals, and there was not one single person of a different color or race or religion in my class. So I'm telling you this to tell you I was sheltered. I got to see very quickly how cruel the world is and everything good and bad in that world, and it made me grow up. But my love is still for Africa. So I do that through agriculture. And I tell people this because I don't care what your race is, your religion is, any of those things, because we're all brothers and sisters in Christ, right? Amen. So my talent is farming, and it's agriculture, because I guarantee you, most of you had some of this beautiful spread over here, and I guarantee you before the day's over, y'all are going to eat. So those are what things that are bind us all together as we go forward. So how do we find these opportunities? I think the best thing is you having the nerve, if I can say it that way, to get us all together in one room, and we have this opportunity to speak and discuss and to be able to talk about what is like minds in our situations, to learn more about another country. How many of you really know where Benin is? Do you know the country next to it? Togo. How many people in the world know where Togo is? When I go back to my small community, where I go to church is a town of about 3,000. So it's a lot bigger than where I graduated. But I tell them I was in Benin 2 years ago, and I was in Togo. And most of the people go, "Where's that?" And so it's interesting for me to be able to come back and share these opportunities with you. To close, I've gotten to see projects across Africa, and they amaze me. I serve on CNFA, which is Cultivating New Frontiers in Ag, as their vice chairman, with Secretary Espy as the chairman. And we are in those countries. We're in Zambia, we're in Zimbabwe with those. I get to work with business leaders from around the world to take them to different countries. One of my partners is here, and we do produce, bringing avocados from Tanzania back to the United States. Some of the challenges that we face are not in Africa, but sometimes within our own government here, of how do we get FAO and USDA to allow two-way trade. So don't be afraid if you have a business challenge. Let's try to figure out mutually in this room, how can we overcome those challenges? And I'm going to kind of stop there, because I think it's sometimes better to have questions if someone has a question. If not, thank you.
No. The question I will have for someone like you, you mentioned aid and trade. Aid never walked the continent, and aid never leave the US, never leave the US. Now, when you have to take aid from other people, you sack all your rights globally. You invoke this attack to that aid. WTO alignment is attached to that. Sorry. Anyway, the bottom line was I'm trying to say to you, it is time for trade. But the Africans, we still prefer American partnership and product than the Chinese, surprisingly due to our negative historical inheritance. But moving forward from there, the continent is going to be the biggest market in the world coming in the next 10 years. There has been some movement in the US government around this area. For example, the US is building the biggest embassy in the world in Nigeria as we speak. Nobody knows that quietly. So they realized the potential growth of this youth population coming, and everybody's positioned for it. What do Americans need to do, and what do the American government to do to make sure the entrepreneurship group in this part of the world understand the need to engage the continent and the need for Americans to now go into a future that is inclusive, not exclusive, and not oppressive? Thank you for that question.
You packed a lot into that question. If there's one thing I've learned from my multiple years of traveling across Africa is sometimes it's better to tell that in a story than a direct answer because of the parables. So let me tell you one that kind of summarizes some of that. 2 years ago, I was traveling quite a bit with the president of Comoros. He was the president of the AU there for a while. And he asked me and a couple other guys to bring businessmen to Comoros because an island of, a few 100,000 people under French rule, the colonization, he needed help with infrastructure, he needed help with energy, all of those things, so we did. And he was up in front of his parliament and the rest of the country on a televised event where they got multiple business deals done. And there was no agricultural deal, but I was still there because I'd kind of helped just connect people. A lot of times, I'm not the expert in the room, I could just connect people. He stopped about halfway through and he said, this is going to change their GDP by, and he had the numbers, I'll get it wrong so I won't use a number. And it was a large amount that it was going to change this country's GDP by and their economy. He stopped and he's like, this was actually, it's around $7 trillion was all of those business deals combined into a package. He stopped and he said, the next deal, the 8th deal out of those 7, that's not on his desk to sign that day is the most important one, and it's the smallest. And the other guys are looking at me because I was the one talking to him mostly. And so they said, what did we miss? Did we screw something up? Did we offend the country? Did we, all these speculations that run through your mind negatively. He looks right at the camera and he says, if I can't feed my people, none of these infrastructure programs work. None of them. He was looking at oil and gas. He was looking at roads, energy, all of those things. The lowest amount project was a couple $1 billion. And what he was looking for was the thing that was missing. The thing that was missing was an $800,000 rice deal. To feed his people of Comoros cost $800,000 for a whole year. And he said, that's the #1 program that I need in my country. Because if I can't feed my people, they won't have me up here as a leader. To me, that's a leader. So to answer your question in a parable, it's finding your priorities and finding the trust in who you can do business with back and forth. You're right. Aid is not the answer for many countries, let alone Africa. It's how can we build business deals that add to your business structure of the country and add trust so that we can build relationships. Anything else?
So I'm going to be a little bit provocative here, so please excuse me. Be one. So early explorers of European writers in Africa really wrote about Africa a lot and stigmatized the community over there. That history is still prevalent across the world in many places. Here in the USA, there are still people who believe that Africans are still naked and uncivilized. From your experience, can you talk about how those notions have not changed much and maybe contributing to a lot of mistrust and misunderstanding? You said something about trust earlier. it would be very nice to really for you to really explore in that area, because here in America, a lot of people really don't understand Africa, and mostly when they go to Africa for the first time, they say, "Wow, people are just living just like us." It would be very nice to hear from you. Please.
Do all you guys know what a redneck is? There's a lot of people that don't understand what a redneck is from the United States. So, perception versus reality is what you just asked me. How do we change the perception of Africa to reflect the reality of Africa? And that is very true because, and it's interesting you're asking me this because I'm not from Africa. I didn't come over here from Africa, and my color does not reflect that. But from my point of view, it goes back to we're all brothers and sisters in Christ, and there are smart people and there are dumb people in every country in the world. And that's why I used the joke about rednecks, because I told you how small my town was. When I go home, there are a lot of dumb rednecks. and some of those are my friends. So how do we change that perspective? And it's not easy. But, PR firms make their living over that subject. But you know what? I think that a lot of things are changing about Africa. People are understanding that Africa is a global force to be dealt with. And as you come back and you tell stories, and I try to tell everyone I know all of the great things about Africa, and I try to bring back clothes for my kids, because you know what? Those clothes that are made in Africa are better than the clothes that I buy here that probably come from some other country, not here. And so how do we shape those good things? And those are hard. And I'm not giving you a good answer, but we have to figure that out. And so I may not be the best person to answer that, but we have to keep telling the story. In agriculture, I'm always telling the story of agriculture, of we all have to eat. We all have to feed each other. And we have to work together to do that. And the Africa story is the same way. It's just a different story. Everybody in here has a story, and everyone has a unique story. So how do we tell your unique story? How do we tell Africa's unique story? And Uganda is going to have a different story than Nigeria. That doesn't make one right or wrong. It just means we're all unique. And that's the way I want to approach it, because I don't look at things from the same way that some other people do, because I've seen all of the good and the bad in the world, and I choose not to see the bad, and I want to see what's good, and those are the stories I want to share.